you just got the black pieces and your opponent played d4. And you do not want to play d5 because you're worried about various different openings, like the London system, the Queen's Gambit, or the Coley system. In this position, I'll be showing you one of the most solid lines you can play against all of these openings without learning much theory, and that is what we call the triangle system. Alright, so let's start with the most common opening in beginner positions. Starts with d4, d5, and then your opponent plays bishop f4. Bishop f4 is called the London system, and you'll face the London system a lot because it's a very solid opening for white. In this position, you'll just play e6, playing basically the Queen's Gambit declined, and no matter what your opponent plays in this position, you will play c6. Here you've completed the triangle system. You might realize why we call it the triangle system. It's because you have a triangle-like structure here in the middle. And this is very solid because black cannot infiltrate with his knight, or his other knight when you push this pawn. It's very solid. Let's say white continues with the regular London system. You just play knight f6. No matter where this bishop goes, here or here, you will always play bishop e7. Ignore what the engine says. This is just more solid for black. Then, let's say if your opponent castles, you also castle. This is the position of the triangle system you'll get a lot. You'll get this in a lot of games. Let's say white continues in regular London fashion. Knight d2, you also play knight d7. This is the complete triangle system. With the triangle system, what the main ideas are, it's to push this c5 pawn, put it on c5, threaten the center. Let's say your opponent plays a regular move, rook e1. You play here, and your opponent can't take because that gives you insane development. Doesn't matter you take with bishop or knight. It's very strong bishop now, and in this position it's a very strong knight. You can choose to take any one of them you want. And also, if your opponent plays c5, then you have various ideas with knight b6. Knight b6 to try to push the pawn and have a very strong position, very flexible knight. Queen can't come because queen can't come to attack a rook later on the game because it's defended. It's a very simple position. You might ask why not play c5 here and let your opponent and have very quick development with knight c6. It's because this position has a lot of issues for black, especially because it's very dynamic, and weaker players will crumble under the pressure and take, and this is very good for white. As you can see, even though it says plus 0.2, he has very quick development. His attack on the c7 square will be very hard to defend. You'll have to put your knight here. This is a very bad position for black, especially for beginners. This is why I prefer when we put the setup like this. And this is a very simple game. You will always have this position. Try not to blunder your pawn, please. Just you don't blunder your bishop, please. If you play here, then you just lose on the spot. That's why no matter what your opponent plays, you'll always try to push for c5. You play c5 later on because now it's extremely defended. You can also put the knight on queen on d1. You can also put the queen on d6, my bad, don't blunder your queen. And even though the engine says it's plus 0.3 for black, it's very hard to prove that. It's very hard to prove that for any unexperienced opponent. And this pressure is very hard. Let's say he plays a waiting move. You can just play c5, and if it takes, you take back. And look at this, your bishop is free now. You can push. You have a lot of options. Now we'll have how to play the triangle system against the Queen's Gambit, one of the most common openings in chess. Here, white plays d4, and you play d5, and he plays c4. Against c4, you can play the Slav, but I don't recommend it, because if takes, then we're out of the triangle system, and you don't want to learn any theory. Here you just decline. If black takes, you just take him back, and your bishop is free, your knight is free, you get very easy, very simple development. You have a very strong setup. Most of the time he won't take, he will play knight c3. After knight c3, don't get tempted and play knight f6 straight away, because we don't want to pin, we just want to play very solidly. So we'll play c6. Against c6, in this position, white can play various moves, and against all of them, you will play knight g6. It doesn't matter what white plays in this position, you play knight g6. Do not pre-move it. Please don't pre-move in the opening. But knight g6 is the common idea in this position. The most natural move is knight c3, knight f3, my bad, and then you play knight f6. Even though the best move is to take, it's hard to prove it because playing in a Queen's Gambit accepted fashion, in a Slav defense kind of way, it's not really easy to play for black, and we're just trying to play the most natural moves here. Most of the time black will play bishop f4 or g5, g4 or g5, it doesn't matter. You'll always play bishop e7, and after bishop e7, no matter what white plays again, you'll just castle. This is very regular for the triangle system. You have your strong triangle here of pawns. Even though your bishop is kind of hiding behind them, we'll push for c5 or e5 later on in the game, and we'll have a very easy, very simple position going forward. Let's say white plays bishop d3, simple move. You can play something like knight d7. This is still very common for the Queen's Gambit. It says the best move is to take, but most likely your opponent won't take and he'll castle. And then here you kick out the bishop. If he takes, of course, you're going to take back with your bishop. Even though the engine argues taking with the knight is better, it's hard to play like that. Just play with your bishop, have a strong bishop here staring down this file. It's very strong, it defends against any mate threats, and it's defended by the knight. Then, let's say your opponent plays rook e1, very natural move. In this position, I like playing queen b6, because with queen b6, you force your opponent to react, and if he pushes, he kind of ruins his pawn structure. As you can see, the engine immediately recommends queen a5. With queen a5, if he just ignores it, we win a knight. A lot of your opponents will do that. And if your opponent defends the pawn, then you just play rook e8. Rook e8 is very easy, very straightforward. Even though there's a check here, it's not really scary because you can just run away. Like here, black has nothing, he just moved your king forward a bit. And yep, you will also try to play a5, a4 in the future because of how solid your king side is. Your queen side will have various attacks going forward. Alright, so now we've discussed the two most common openings with d4. I'll show you what to play against anything other than the London and the Queen's Gambit. And it's very, very straightforward. Let's say your opponent plays knight f3. You just play e6, always e6. Your opponent goes here. You play c6 again. This position, you will always play it against every single d4 opening. The triangle system here, you always play it against any d4 opening. See your opponent plays some weird moves. You play knight f6 and bishop e7, and you castle. He castles, and here. Look, you're already winning. In this position, black is winning. This is why the triangle system is so solid. You can always push for c5 against any opening. You can always push for e5. In this position, pushing for e5 blunders the pawn. After these knights get traded off, for example, let's say some regular moves. You play here, and any opponent will not play bishop c1. Of course, normal opponents will just either push or defend with the queen or the rook. Then in any of these positions, what you will do is c5. Ignore the fact c5 says it's winning for white. This is very hard to play. This is very hard to play for white. He doesn't have any counterattack. He doesn't have any smart ideas to try to play. It's just a simple, straightforward opening. Alright, so after discussing the Queen's Gambit, the London system, and also the different openings you need to learn how to play with the triangle system, we have something called the note boom variation. The note boom variation is an opening white can play against you in the triangle system. It's basically the main line of the triangle system. You will not face this often, but when you do, you need to learn how to play against it. This is the only tricky line in the triangle system that you really have to learn and focus on, that you might face. All the other lines are completely winning for black, and with solid play, you easily win. The moves start with d4, d5. Of course, black's gonna play Queen's Gambit. Then you play e6, knight c3, and c6. This is very regular stuff. This is basically the Queen's Gambit's main line. But instead of playing knight f3 or a regular move like bishop g5, white plays e4. e4 on the spot. The biggest issue with e4 is that you have to take. If you don't take, you lose. That's the biggest issue with e4. You don't have many options. If you push your knight, then he just pushes. And this is completely winning for white now. You have to take the pawn on e4. And after you take on e4, black will take back with the knight. Or white will take back with the knight. Then, in this position, there's a tactic that wins a pawn. But it's not really felt because of the attack white will have. Starts with bishop b4. White blocks and you take. You might say, how does this win a pawn? He can just take me back. Right, but if he takes you back, then you just win it with check. You just win this back with check. Alright, so the main line for white is to block with a knight. But when he blocks with the knight, you might see, oh, his pawn is hanging. But look at what happens when you take his pawn. After you take his pawn, it's already +2 for white. Why? Because after queen d6, knight d7, and knight e3, your queen has to run away, or else it's lost. You go here, this is a very obscure move. It's bishop a3. Bishop a3 basically forces you to come back to defend. When you come back, you can play something like a6, or you can come back to avoid g3. I would play a6 in this position to avoid the knight coming in with a huge attack. And then when he plays g3, you just come back with your queen. And when he long castles, you play c5. Look at this, is very, very losing for black because of the raging attack coming onto your queen, coming onto your king, and you don't have rights to castle. You're gonna take a long time to castle. This is very, very tricky. You don't want to be in this position, even though you're up 2 pawns. You're up 2 pawns, but it's still +3 for white. So let's go back to the main line. After here, you should play knight d7. What knight d7 does, it tries to allow you to castle after a few moves. The white will play the same moves, but instead of taking the pawn, you play queen e5, trying to make him trade, and when you trade, this is an equal position. So let's go back. White will go back, try to avoid the trade to have his attack. You play knight g6, very regular stuff. Long castle. And you will play this move, c5. c5 is a good move. Why? Because it allows you to castle, and this is defended. If white tries to go back, you just push your knight. Your queen hangs, sure, but you will win it back. White will take his free pawn that he took before. He tries to also attack your rook. You will just attack his bishop. And after he takes, and you take, this is an equal position. Why is this equal? Because both positions have equal material and equal threats. This pawn is weak, so white will have to defend it with something like b3. And also you can go knight b6 and free up your bishop. Lots of various ideas. You can also tuck your king. This is just a regular opening, and now you need to play chess. This is a somewhat difficult endgame, but it's the only line that is hard in the triangle system. Alright, that was me explaining the triangle system for you. If this video helped you, please drop a like and subscribe. We'll have a lot more video openings like this. Thank you so much, and goodbye.